The bright side of addiction is recovery, and recovery is living proof. If you're in recovery or know or love someone who is, or you simply want to know more about what recovery is all about, well, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast for you. We carry the message of hope and the promise of recovery. And a reminder, you can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. Recent episodes have featured an historic interview I did 41 years ago with Betty Ford. Actor John Larroquette was on the program, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, musician Bonnie Raitt, authors Brene Brown and Anne Lamott, J.H. Ants, former NFL players Ryan Leaf and Thomas Hollywood Henderson. All these interviews and many more on our website, plus conversations with everyday people in long-term recovery, sharing their story, their insight, their path. Welcome to Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. We are going to laugh about recovery with America's leading recovery humorist, the great Mark Lundholm, who has been living the good life of recovery since back in 1988. He's a funny guy. Here's a clip from today's podcast.
I'm not a mean guy. I'm not a bad guy. I suffer from a disease called first thought wrong. My first thought is always wrong, incorrect, impolite, inappropriate, cruel, self-centered, criminal, some form, fashion, fraction of first thought, always wrong. First thought wrong. If I say thank you, it quiets that first thought. I don't want to forget that at 120 pounds, I couldn't put together 4 hours of recovery. Gratitude is the key, because humility is the key, and there is no humility without gratitude. Gratitude is the key.
My conversation with recovery comedian Mark Lundholm, along with some clips from his shows, coming up in a matter of minutes. I'm Neil Scott, host of Recovery Coast to Coast, with two simple words. Thank you. A simple message from my heart to yours. Thank you for listening to our podcast. There are a lot of podcasts on recovery on the internet. Thank you for choosing and listening to ours. Our website is recoverycoasttocoast.org. Following 17 years of nightly broadcasting on iHeartRadio in Seattle, our podcast features interviews with everyday people in recovery, as well as clinicians, authors, and recovering celebrities who offer the promise of hope and the reality of recovery, plus well-vetted resources for individuals, families, and friends. We invite you to enjoy the podcast. Share it with your friends as well. Recovery is an American way of life. And a reminder, if you would like to reach out to us, I'd love to hear from you. Our email is recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Recovery Coast to Coast, supported by Sundown M Ranch, one of America's oldest, least expensive, and most successful treatment programs. What makes a good treatment program? A successful treatment center? Well, first and foremost, the staff. It's not about the facility, although at Sundown M Ranch they do have a beautiful facility. It's right at the mouth of the Yakima River Canyon outside of Seattle. But it's not about the amenities, because this is not a resort. It's a place to get well and stay well, hopefully, finding a path forward on the road to long-term recovery. Sundown is not in it to maintain an ever-increasing financial bottom line, as, frankly, a lot of treatment programs are. For Sundown, the bottom line is recovery, long-term recovery, life-changing recovery. Some 200,000 individuals and families have found their path forward from addiction to long-term recovery. You may not be looking for a treatment center right now, but I'd like you to consider Sundown being at the top of the list when it comes to needing a treatment center, and often those decisions need to be made quickly. Check out their program, check out their facility, and their reputation at sundown.org, where recovery begins. Well, as I pour myself a cup of coffee, I invite you to join me for a few laughs. Grab your own favorite beverage. As they say in the program, we are not a glum lot. Well, our guest this time is anything but glum. From the audio archives, my conversation with one of America's top recovery humorists and a guy in long-term recovery, my friend Mark Lundholm.
Joined by an old friend. He's been on the program before. Nice to have him back. Mark Lundholm, guy that is making a lot of news around the country. He's been on Comedy Central. I'm sure you have seen him or heard about him. He's been doing this an awful long time. I think back in the 80s when he was in a halfway house. But he'll tell you all about it. Mark Lundholm, welcome back to the program.
Man, that's. I was thinking you were talking about somebody else. It sounded very kind.
Well, I was, as a matter of fact, but he's not here, so we'll have to go with you. Hey,
glad I could fill in.
How in the world are you? You're one of the hardest working guys in not only show business, but the addiction speaking circuit as well.
You know, I have a ball doing what I do. I started out in '88, actually, and I was living in a halfway house, and I would volunteer to go to these shelters or prisons or jails or detoxes, places I was very familiar with my history, you know. And these days, I'm asked to go speak at conferences for therapists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals, and then I do some club work, you know, comedy club stuff for the normies, you know, and I do 12-step shows for conventions or conferences for the recovery people, and I have a one-man show that tours different cities in the world called Addicted. A comedy of substance. It's a Broadway show.
Halfway house, but he'll tell you all about it. Mark Lundholm, welcome back to the program.
Man, that's. I was thinking you were talking about somebody else. It sounded very kind.
Well, I was, as a matter of fact, but he's not here, so we'll have to go with you. Hey,
glad I could fill in.
How in the world are you? You're one of the hardest working guys in not only show business, but the addiction speaking circuit as well.
You know, I have a ball doing what I do. I started out in '88, actually, and I was living in a halfway house, and I would volunteer to go to these shelters or prisons or jails or detoxes, places I was very familiar with my history, you know. And these days, I'm asked to go speak at conferences for therapists and psychiatrists and mental health professionals, and then I do some club work, you know, comedy club stuff for the normies, you know, and I do 12-step shows for conventions or conferences for the recovery people, and I have a one-man show that tours different cities in the world called Addicted. A comedy of substance. It's a Broadway show that I wrote about different addictions, the ones that aren't really mainstream, the ones that most people don't talk about, you know, golf or work or food or, you know, these other ones that kind of don't get the airplay that Celebrity Rehab will show you on their show, you know, that kind of thing. But I'm very fortunate to say that I get to work a lot, and it's because I have a problem, you know.
And what is recovery like for you today? I mean, you're on the road, which I guess for some entertainers can be kind of a slippery spot.
Yeah, I've learned how to navigate that terrain by being productive while I'm out here. Now I'm doing some normie comedy club stuff, but during the day tomorrow, the day after that, I'll do a prison or a jail. I'm doing a shelter. I keep busy by doing the freebie stuff. You know, the donated time. That keeps me a little more centered and grounded. And let's be honest, nobody who's an addict is stupid. Nobody who's an addict is born mean or unproductive. We're forgetful. You know, I think our problem is our memories are short. So if I can do the stuff out on the road that got me started in this industry, I'm not very full of myself most days. I'm not that big a deal on the road to take myself seriously and fall into some of the traps that some celebrities do. And I don't consider myself a celebrity in that light anyway. But I think that some people who do what they do for a living that people pay attention to, I think that they're handicapped in a way, you know, because I'll do a great hour show tomorrow night. I'll do a really wonderful hour's worth of comedy. But the 23 hours that I have left during the day, I'm no big deal. There's no applause. There's no lights on and a mic in my mouth. You know, it's just me.
You talk about navigating on the road. What about people who are fans of Mark Lundholm who may want to come to see you in a comedy club, which, again, alcohol is served? Is the comedy club the mainstream club? Do you do the addiction stuff there, or is it a different act?
I do a very subtle reference to being in recovery if I'm on stage in a normal comedy club. For instance, if I use the word powerless in a sentence, I see different ears perk up, right? Powerless to the normie means, geez, we don't have electricity in the house. We better light a candle.
Yeah.
If I say that on stage, the word candle will trigger some heroin addict. You know what I mean? It's really funny the way people hear the words they used to use differently. But in a comedy club where they serve alcohol, I'll work 5 nights at a comedy club. But on the 6th night, I'll do a no alcohol show.
Oh.
It's called An Evening of 12-Step Humor, or Mark L. is Back, or something like that. That's a little bit subtle about the recovery contingent in this community, and that show sells out before I even get into town.
Okay.
But they don't serve any liquor that one night, Monday night or a Sunday night. The club is usually closed on that night. But they get to open their doors. They get an extra night of comedy. You know, the owner likes it. The audience gets a ton of very specific material on that night, and there's no alcohol served out of respect for maybe some people who are newer, fresher. Alcohol's never been the enemy for me. Neither was cocaine or heroin or methamphetamine or all that other stuff I played with in the 80s. That was never the enemy. The enemy was I needed a substance to provide something for me that was lacking. Money is dope to me. Attention is dope to me. Sex is dope to me. It's all the same distraction, obsession, addiction process. But so I don't mind going in a place where they're serving liquor. And I'm not a panty waste when it comes to watching somebody have a beer. I've been clean a long time, and I don't eat macaroni and cheese either, but you go ahead. It's all right. It's not a threat to me. I'm a threat to me, you know. So, but for some people, God bless them, when they're new in recovery, there's a fear factor there that, of course, they're intimidated by that, or of course, it's tempting to them. I remember that phase too, but I didn't work in comedy clubs when I was newly sober. You know, it took me 4 or 5 years of being sober before I'd walk into a club. So out of respect for that group, we don't serve any alcohol on that one night. But the rest of the week, they drink. You know, most normies drink socially, and they eat food, and they go to work the next day, and they don't have a problem.
You started back in 1988 out of the recovery house. How did you get into the recovery house? Just give us kind of a brief thumbnail of Mark's descent down and his beginning.
October of '88, I was living on the streets of Oakland under a bridge or an abandoned building, or if the weather was decent, you know, a bench in the park or some kind of, underpass. I was, the animal hunt every day, get your dope, get your drink, and stop the shakes and try to pass out somewhere where it was safe, and try to wake up with your shoes and your wrap, whatever it was, a coat or a blanket or something, because that stuff got stolen every night, you know, by the tough guys. I was no tough guy. I ended up suicidal in a 4-point restraint mental hospital. Stayed there a month, gained some weight, stopped shaking, you know, my eyes focused a little bit. I could start to listen to people talk and read a little bit better than I could when I was shaking and baking and looking and cooking, you know. And I moved into a halfway house from there, lived there 6 months, and that's where it began for me. That was October through, say, April or May of '89, and I've never looked back, I mean, with any kind of consequence. I look back all the time for reference.
Sure.
Or balance or some humility, and I probably do 50 shows a year that are in a place like that that I used to live or exist in. So, because like I said earlier, the reference was I'm forgetful. You know, I don't want to forget that at 120 pounds, I couldn't put together 4 hours of recovery. You know, I just couldn't do it.
In addition to doing the stand-up comedy stuff, you have a game that a number of our listeners have called and said it's just absolutely hilarious.
Oh, thanks.
It's a recovery board game. Tell us about that and how you got involved with that.
You know, I was in Omaha, Nebraska at a comedy club, and a guy, a farmer from Iowa, who was sober about 3 or 4 years, he said, "You ought to have a board game that's like your show." And I thought, that's good weed you're smoking, man.
Yeah, I guess.
And I had never considered that. He said, so he called me a few times, and I kind of put it off. And he said, I'll pay for it. I'll pay for the manufacturer and the artwork and all that if you just design the game. So he flew out to California, and we talked for a week. And we got this hotel room and went to work every day on what it would take to make a game called Recovery, based on the comedy that I do. And it's a very fun game. It's very serious in parts, too. It's very, very much a microcosm of somebody's recovery. you draw cards and move pieces around a game board, and depending upon the square you land, there's a consequence or a benefit, and the card you draw will tell you you can participate or you can watch. It's like real life in recovery, and the people you play with dictate how the game goes. Now, that's a very vague explanation, but you do have to play the game to find out how it's played, and that's the real life. That's real life. You have to participate to find out what the rules are. And then once you know what the game is, there's a huge bunch of laughs in the game, but they're brought to the table by the participants. It's an experiential game, and it's across. Here's the joke part. This is right out of the show. I developed a board game. It's called Recovery, the board game. It's a board game about recovery. That's for the slow people. It's a recovery board game. Okay, we're all on the same page now. It's a cross between Truth or Dare, Chutes and Ladders, and, of course, Sorry. Because we have so many amends to make in this fellowship.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a fun game. RecoveryBoardGame.com. You can go to that. Or you can go to marklundholm.com. Thanks for bringing that up. I forget about that stuff from time to time, the things I've been allowed to either create or participate in that have everything to do with recovery and nothing to do with the disease really anymore. I got to say that I'm lucky enough to be born an addict, an alcoholic, codependent, sex addict, food-addicted person, gambler, all kinds of stuff we don't have time for tonight. But I'm lucky enough to say that everything in my past has provided a future for my wife, myself, my kids. There are no accidents or bad paths in life. I've just made some errors in judgment where I left the path I was on.
There are, like I say, a number of people who've written about the board game. A lot of them have watched it in treatment centers or played the game in treatment centers. Do you do a lot of work with treatment centers?
A ton. I have the last 2 years, I have a humor seminar that I give called Humor and Treatment.
Really?
And it's an all-day group process. I'm not a clinician. I'm not trained. I'm not a professional. I don't have a degree in anything. But when it comes to humor about recovery and in treatment, I am borderline. I'm very, very good at taking something that's detrimental or deadly and at least providing a lighter side so you can look at the information without a lot of fear. I've been doing that for almost 20 years. So I do this humor seminar in treatment centers. I go there, I do a 2-hour group in the morning, a 2-hour group in the afternoon, and then an hour with just the staff. And I have 12 this year clients all over the country, treatment centers that can afford it, where I go in at least quarterly and do an all-day seminar about humor in recovery and what it takes to lighten up and have some levity and some balance. And there's a spiritual nature in humor. God gave you the ability to laugh and smile before you could speak as an infant, before you could walk, clean yourself, protect your own anatomy. He gave you the ability to have joy from a laugh. So I don't know where that becomes less of a priority as an adult, but some of us have to get back to that to start to learn how to become an adult, So I'm fortunate enough, I get to go to places like the Canyon in Malibu or Sierra Tucson or the Refuge, It's tough to get me to talk, isn't it?
It is. I just, it's like pulling teeth, Mark. I think you probably are a member of the same 12-step group I'm a member of, which is for talk show hosts, which is On and On and On and On.
You'll never get me to stop until you hang up the phone, I swear.
Take a listen to Mark Lundholm on stage. Mark, talk to me about gratitude and the role that plays in your recovery.
I can't tell you how important that is every day for me. The first words out of my mouth in the morning when I pray are thank you. I say thank you, God, the first 3 words out of my mouth every morning. Because there's a prayer I wrote that I say every morning, and it begins with thank you. Because I have another day, an opportunity, a doorway to pass through where it is profoundly different from everything I used to choose to do, So I have to be grateful for that. I like to be grateful for that because it provides a better attitude moving forward during the day. Now, I told you I'm forgetful. That's my nature. I'm not a mean guy. I'm not a bad guy. I suffer from a disease called first thought wrong. My first thought is always wrong, incorrect, impolite, inappropriate, cruel, self-centered, criminal, some form, fashion, fraction of first thought, always wrong. First thought wrong. Addict, certainly. Alcoholic, okay, yeah. Codependent, yeah, absolutely. First thought wrong, that's my problem. So my first thought is self-centered, or I got to take, or I don't have enough, or I want more. If I say thank you, it quiets that first thought. So the gratitude I need to remember every day is I have gifts, you know. I'm charismatic, I'm funny, I'm attractive. And I'm not saying that stuff in an arrogant way. God made addicts and alcoholics and recovery people more attractive than most human beings because we need to do more with it. So I have the ability to draw people to me in an audience, in a conversation, one-on-one. I mean, the people listening to the radio show right now, why aren't you on this radio show talking about your recovery? Well, you can be. When you're given that opportunity, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be grateful for it, or are you going to spout off about how great you are? That's the problem. Kurt Cobain, Chris Farley, Elvis Presley, all those guys forgot that there's gratitude necessary. George Burns, Carol Burnett, Bob Hope, they remembered every day that they're grateful for the gift they have and they better do something well with it. And you can do it for 100 years. I think God's very kind about the length of road we're allowed to travel if we're grateful. So the short answer to your question, which is really not my strong suit, the short answer is gratitude is the key, because humility is the key, and there is no humility without gratitude.
Let's take a listen to Mark Lundholm on stage.
In every audience, there are always two groups of people. There are healthy people and people like me. Healthy people watch that TV show Cops and think, oh my God. I'm going, I did that. Oh, run, go, come on. I'm rooting for the naked guy. Don't resist, man. They'll hit you with a big, ooh, I told you. Healthy people don't drive under the influence. Healthy people don't drink till they puke and then keep drinking because there's more room down there now. Healthy people never buy a bag of anything illegal because it's illegal. Most people have never been to jail, not even to visit. That was amazing to me. No way. Never? Come on, they gotta know somebody. No, they don't. See, healthy people make friends. I recruit accomplices. I used to gamble. I would bet money on everything from poker to pinball. Between my bookie and my dealer and my bookie, money passed through me like bran. I quit gambling 2 years before I quit cocaine, because, hey, you got to have priorities. My dependencies have shifted from cocaine to computers. Oh, nothing says immediate gratification like, you got mail. Or instant messaging. I am, as in immediate, impatient. I am waiting. I need this now, right now. Not now? Okay. How about now? How can something that takes 15 seconds be too slow? I got broadband because I'm addicted to now. Connection takes forever. Now I know why they call it a cursor. Food addiction is tougher to deal with because food is sort of necessary, really. I mean, you never go to an Overeaters Anonymous meeting and hear, hi, my name's Joanne, and I've gone 6 years now with no food. Even as a child, I was a good kid who wanted to be bad. It just seemed to me that good was okay, but bad was better. Bad was exciting. Bad was more fun. It was entertaining. And as a 5 or 6 year old child, I needed to be entertained because I was Ritalin boy. They didn't call it ADD when I was growing up. That's how I spelled dad. I knew my family was different from other families on the block. In our backyard, we had a mood swing set. Every seat with a name on it. Fear, lust, rage. Hopelessness was too long, so we just wrote mom. You hear the word dysfunctional a lot now. Dysfunctional upbringing, dysfunctional family. Dysfunctional? My family was delusional. Dysfunctional would have been the toaster in the kitchen that never worked properly. And dysfunctional Catholic? That's like saying little midget. Friday night fights at our house made the WWE look like a documentary. How many families do you know that got kicked out of Disneyland? Did you know that Disneyland doesn't sell alcohol? My dad didn't. 15 minutes after we get there, he's on Main Street holding Goofy by the lapels. Where's the bar? My dad also didn't know that the characters at Disneyland don't talk to you. He thought Goofy was taunting him. 10 minutes later, security is escorting our entire family out of, asking us not to return to the happiest place on earth. That sticks with you as a kid. Even when you think you're not teaching, a child is learning. That's a child's function. Learn, learn, learn. All day long. Learn, learn, learn. Learn, learn, learn. Hey, what's that? Learned it. Unless you were a kid like me. What's that? Learned it. Learned it. Just checking.
How many dates a year are you on the road?
I do over 300 shows a year. Every year my goal is better work, less travel. So I take better gigs. I make better choices. There's more substance to the gigs or the shows I do, and then I can have more time off. Somewhere they call that balance. I'm not good at that. But I hear that some people are capable of working real hard and playing real hard. I usually work real hard and don't play at all. So I'm trying really, really hard this year to practice a little more about what I preach, which is balance and consistency and some normalcy at home.
And it sounds like you're getting a little bit in balance, my friend.
You know, I'm trying.
Mark Lundholm joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast. I thank you so much for your time. I wish you continued success.
I also want to tell you thanks for the generous amount of time you spent and the silence that you provided me so that I can rant and ramble, which is really, really unpopular in some circles. So thank you.
On and on and on and on.
That's right. And now I'm going to go to Al-Anon because I apologize for who I am.
Mark Lundholm, thank you so much for joining us on Recovery Coast to Coast.
Funny business from the awesome Mark Lundholm. You can find out more about Mark, his schedule, his products, his recovery resources, and a lot more. All at his website, marklundholm.com. That's MarklundHolm. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation. And by the way, I want to remind listeners of this podcast, if you'd like to tell your story of recovery, regardless of the path that you've chosen, as long as you have been in continuous recovery for at least a year or more, do drop us a note at recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. Coming up next, iconic actor Dick Van Dyke. He's going to share some reflections on personal recovery in 30 seconds. And now, as promised, here is iconic actor and a guy in long-term recovery, Dick Van Dyke. Well, that wraps up this edition of Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed the podcast, and I certainly hope you have, please share it with your friends. Please share it with your friends. You can do that by social media or simply by telling somebody about it or sending them an email. You can find all of our podcasts at recoverycoasttocoast.org. If you'd like to get in touch, I'd love to hear from you. Email recoverycoasttocoast@comcast.net. And also, please hit the subscribe or follow button. It's free, and you'll be notified the next time we publish a podcast. And remember, if you know someone who is experiencing problems with alcohol or any other drug, well, here's a 24-hour national helpline. Now, this offers free information and confidential treatment referrals. They've got Spanish-speaking individuals available as well. The number is 1-800-622-4357. 1-800-622-HELP. We encourage you to check out findsupport.gov as well. It's a fairly new website designed for individuals, families, and friends, including how to pay for treatment, including low-cost and free treatment options. You'll also find healthcare support, how to help someone else who is having a problem, or find help for yourself. It's all in one convenient place at findsupport.gov. And please join us next time for America's Voice for Recovery, Recovery Coast to Coast, the national podcast. Another shout out to our sponsoring organization, the good folks at Sundown M Ranch, where recovery begins, sundown.org. I'm Neil Scott reminding you to stay healthy, live in gratitude, and be kind to others. Remember, the bright side of addiction is recovery. Pass it on.